Well, welcome everybody to our next interview in the series of interviews with our endorsed candidate. We have got Pete Serrano here running for Attorney General. Pete, it is great to have you and in person. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Spokane's my second home at this point. Thank you for having me, MJ, and for everyone that's going to watch this.
Yeah, we're excited to introduce you to our voters. So, Pete, tell us about yourself, your background, and why you are running for this position.
Sure. So I'm a practicing lawyer of 15 years. Initially, I did all energy and environmental law, and my very first lawsuit that I worked on was back in D.C. Right after law school. I worked for a small water litigation firm, and we sued the U.S. government, the Environmental Protection Agency, on rulemaking. In other words, when an agency adopts a rule, you have to determine whether or not they follow the proper procedures and steps. And I was involved in that lawsuit, and I remember trying to explain this to my family, and I was really concerned about telling my grandfather, who was an educator and a union man and a World War II veteran. I thought, how am I going to sell him that I'm suing the U.S. government? And what he said to me just has always left a mark of when I told him. He said, Peter, isn't it amazing that we live in a country where you have that right and that ability, and that you get to be part of that? And it really opened my mind of where I even thought people might have concerns about what I did of keeping the government in check. He was very supportive of that. And so then I went off and I worked in the environmental field. Did a lot of project management where I oversaw everything from underwater scuba dive PEs, professional engineers, to take coring samples of docks, to other attorneys, to geologists, everything that it took to build a project. And so we did a lot of stuff in Central California in the oil and gas industry, did a lot of stuff in the Houston shipping channel. And I really enjoyed that. But then I got back into litigation, and eventually friends from law school called and said, hey, come work for us or work with us at the Department of Energy's Hanford site. And I had no idea what that was. I was thinking, what do? Make light bulbs and sockets? And of course, I was very wrong. And then my wife and I, this is 9 years ago, 10 years probably now, flew up from California and flew into Seattle and drove the back route. And I'm like, what is this place? We're driving the desert on 24, and it's been our home since.
Wow.
I've loved it. The most important thing in my life is, what you see on the backside of this. That's my wife, PJ, who you've had the pleasure of meeting. And I'm not sure which of my kids, if not all three. I've got Sophia, Lily, and Max, and they're now 11, 9, and 6. And back to the question of why, it's an open seat. It was an opportunity. I've been suing the government for the past several years after I represented the government for about 8 years, and it was time to make a change. And I just really want my kids to have a future.
Yeah, well, that's an important why, and I actually got to get to know you when we worked on some rulemaking when I was on the State Board of Education, and you helped me understand just the expansion of the rules. Outside of it was going beyond the scope of what the law said, and you helped me to rally and advocate so we could kind of scale that back. So you've been doing amazing, important work, and a lot of cases against our civil liberties, or for our civil liberties, especially through COVID, right?
Yeah, well, and I'll say this, an attorney is only as good as the plaintiff can be, or client. And in that case, when I was working with you, you were a stalwart member of bringing some rational basis to rulemaking, or at least trying to. Yeah. I understand it sucks to be that dissenting voice and opinion, but I appreciate your advocacy for my children. And anyone that's not gotten to know MJ, she was a stalwart advocate for our kids. And I appreciate that voice. And, I founded what's called the Silent Majority Foundation. It's a nonprofit. Did that in 2021, mid-pandemic, because I kind of skipped over this in the intro. I've been on Pasco City Council for 7 years, currently the mayor. And mid-pandemic, I said, Pasco is a conservative enough city. We need to say no to the government shutting our businesses down. And when I tried to take that motion to a floor vote, it got seconded by a friend of mine on council, and then they basically swept it under the rug. And I said, no, I made a motion with a second. We need to have a vote on this. And you can imagine with that type of temperature is a 2-5 loss. I realized the government wasn't, local government wouldn't protect us from state or federal government overreach. And so with that backdrop, I remember a woman who's on city council still. She said to me, "You're an attorney. Why don't you sue the government?" And I thought, yeah, whatever, and I kind of walked away with that, and then had a couple more experiences just watching my kids suffer, especially the 11-year-old in second grade at the time. And, that really motivated me. I mean, parents' love, as is such a strong motivating factor. And for me, it's really what drives me. I love my wife too, let's be clear about that. But just watching out for my kids and trying to give them the future that they deserve is really, that's the basis of, you can wrap that up, and that's what you're going to get with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ironic thing is, when we were working together, those rules were actually coming from the AG's office, which is the position you're running for. So kind of, we've gone full circle a little bit here. So that's pretty cool.
Well, it is. And to your point, it highlights the power of the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General is an advisor to agencies. It's also an advisor to the legislature. It represents the agencies and legislature when they're sued. But it also, again, to your point, rules should not be coming from a particular governmental agency unless it's the legislature. The AG, the Attorney General, should not be engaged in rulemaking with agencies. It should be simply advising them. Now, of course, if the advice is this is constitutional or not, I think that's a really strong position to hang your hat on. Not, hey, let's do this and see what we can get away with, which is what it sounds like your experience was.
Yeah.
And under those circumstances, to me, it's really an outgrowth of the agency, the Attorney General's office, that I think is a big part of what pushed me into running. Again, with the lawsuits that I'm currently involved in, and we could spend hours talking about all those, and I know we don't have that kind of time. It's all about pulling government back to its right structure, right back to where it has its rights and its capacities and its constitutional authority. And when it exceeds, the box, government needs to be put in check. And I look forward to doing that as the Attorney General. And people are like, well, how are you going to do that? You're supposed to defend everything. It's like, that's not really what the Attorney General was intended. When you look at the constitutional discussion of the Attorney General, it's real simple. It talks about a salary, and then it talks about advising. I mean, initially, 100 and whatever, 40 plus years ago, when the state was created under its constitution, the notion was that was an advisory role. Of course, the legislature has the ability to expand it, and I think it's done so in kind of a somewhat perverted, not like in a sexually perverted, but they've perverted the intent of that constitutional duty of the office. And so, again, to me, it's pulling back really the cover as to what, when, where, and how.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was going to ask you if you wanted to share anything else about this office, as a lot of people don't know, what the duties of this office are. And you've kind of talked about that. Is there anything else you want to let people know?
Well, I think the most important thing is understanding the size of the office, right? So for those who haven't followed, Bob Ferguson, running for governor, has been the Attorney General for 12 years. He's expanded the office. I've talked with Rob McKenna, who was the last Attorney General. So 12 years ago, he abdicated his seat running for governor. When McKenna was in, it was about 400 attorneys, give or take. And with Ferguson, it presently sits at over 800 attorneys and 800 staff. It's almost a one-to-one. So I've seen different reports that indicate anywhere from 1,400 to 1,600 staff. Wow. It's about a $240 million a year. I think the biennial budget is just shy of $500 million. And then Bob Ferguson likes to remind us that when he brings what's called affirmative suits, in other words, when he sues big tobacco or when he sues manufacturers or distributors and gets money, he can take that and he's got really loose gloves. And I think that's reasonable. I think it's appropriate when he sues to recover that money. But it sounds like he's used a lot of that to expand his footprint. Which I think, again, and if you're going to then really bring a ton of those cases and really sue those industries, assuming it's a righteous suit, is not such a bad idea. But, when he did the chicken checks and stuff like that, I've talked with sheriffs. There was selling the large capacity magazines. There was a settlement out of that. And sounds like he wants to fund the sheriffs with that money. And a lot of the sheriffs, especially on this side of the state, and quite frankly, most are fairly conservative. So both sides of the state, quite frankly, are saying, no, we don't want I don't want to call it blood money, but we didn't believe in that law, and so we don't want to benefit from it.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what he does with the millions of dollars that he's recovered there.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your campaign, your race. Why should citizens vote for you over your opponent?
Yeah, I mean, it's real simple. I don't want to focus on my opponent, but I'll give you one data point. He said Bob Ferguson has a positive legacy that he wants to continue. So if you want Bob Ferguson 2.0, you absolutely should vote for him. If you want anything different than Bob Ferguson, someone who has consistently challenged what Bob's done, that's me. I have stood for your rights, again, through Silent Majority Foundation, whether it's your firearms rights, actually actively involved in some litigation here in Spokane on behalf of a preacher named Sean Foyt, who came and prayed. And, maybe some of the words he used weren't perfect, talking about the Holy Spirit of fire when you guys were burning, bad timing. But anyone who's a Christian understands the connotation there. But more importantly, it was the fact that your city council, and I'm not calling you out for being part of that or anything, but Spokane City Council adopted a resolution that condemned then Mayor Woodward and for participating with Sean and with Matt Shea, and called Mr. Foyt an anti-LGBTQ extremist. And when you're calling someone out by name, it certainly tampers their ability to come and seek protections of the government, or in his case, to preach, which, are very strongly protected First Amendment rights. So that case is actually currently, the city and the individual council members are looking to dismiss it, and that's moving along. So that's a bit of an update there that I didn't plan to share, but since we're in Spokane, let's talk about it. Another case that we recently filed was on behalf of Dr. Renata Moon, who is a phenomenal pediatrician. So. She went out and testified before Senator Ron Johnson, a United States Senator, holds up a blank piece of paper and says, "This is the insert that comes with the COVID vaccine. How am I supposed to provide informed consent to either my childhood patients or their caregivers?" And, WSU didn't like that. The president of the university actually, WSU being Washington State University, the medical campus here in Spokane, the president of the university actually basically told on her to the Washington Medical Commission. That had some repercussions on her license. And then WSU refused to renew her contract. And so we've actually brought a lawsuit for violation of her First Amendment rights. And equally importantly, as someone who resides in this community, your First Amendment rights, right? It's not just speaking, but it's hearing. And so there's a lot of stuff that we've done outside of those two cases, but since I'm in Spokane, I wanted to highlight them. Those are the types of things that I've focused on. And again, going back to my energy and environmental experience, that to me is going to be our next crisis. The lack of resources with Jay Inslee and the legislature wanting to push electric vehicles. There's this notion of consuming more energy, but we're not producing more. And someone in my background, I think, will have the ability to stand against agencies when they push bad rules. Also, I'm experienced enough to understand. I might not catch all the nuances, but I'll see something, say something, kind of like, this doesn't smell right.
Yeah. Well, it definitely seems like you're going to be the proponent of civil liberties.
Oh, absolutely.
Compared to your opponent. I mean, if you want more of the same in the direction the state is going, go with your opponent. But otherwise, if you want to see this go a different direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because we both talk about being the people's lawyer, and what a stark contrast. I'm literally opposing counsel on a firearms case where he's supporting what's called the assault weapons ban, which is well beyond that scope and quite frankly wildly unconstitutional.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a big thing these days. We've got to fight for our civil liberties, and they're just getting encroached on every corner that we turn around. So you've mentioned a few of these, but what are some of your major top policies that you want to focus on going into this?
Yeah, one of the first things, and I'm really loath and I'll be slow to adopt the notion that I should be proposing legislation. Bob Ferguson's done a lot of that.
Yes.
I very strongly feel like that's the legislature's job. Of course, when there are legislative asks for money or needs for the office, I have no issue there. But to say this is legislation that I think should be on the books, I struggle. That said, one of the things that I really want to push early on, and I'm talking like day one, is getting someone to sponsor with my support. The Childhood Endangerment Act does not include fentanyl as a felony. And so we have had children recently, a 21-month-old in Cowlitz County, or the families in Cowlitz County. The child died, I believe, in Clark County, and had what I've been told was like twice the amount of fentanyl in her body that an adult should have prior to expiring. And part of the issue, the family's telling me, is that obviously mom's not cooperative with the police. Not surprisingly, she's on drugs. But in addition to that, she also is fundamentally protected in that if this were part of the Childhood Endangerment Act, it would naturally be a felony. Now, crystal meth is, and a couple of other drugs are expressly named. And those obviously are issues, but they're kind of like yesterday's issues, right? I'm not saying they're not an issue, but they're not the pervasive issue that fentanyl is today. And so let's update. If we're going to update our laws, let's update them properly to protect the people. So first one is really pushing to really criminalize fentanyl and just try and push back on some of the drug decriminalization. And I know the Supreme Court has a heavy hand in that. So it'll be interesting as I advocate against their stance, to see how that approach occurs. That'll be big, number one. The second one, and I know this is a very nuanced issue, but the Public Records Act and openness and transparency. I know they have an ombudsman, an individual that stands as the Public Records Act. I'm not sure whether or not they need more staff under the ombudsman. I'm not sure whether or not there just needs to be a larger footprint of the Public Records Act assistance. In other words, people that respond. And then the other thing associated with that is once we right-size that subset of the organization, getting them to be comfortable with not redacting everything. I've requested a lot of stuff from the AG's office, and a lot of it's just pure black.
Right.
It's like,
all redacted.
Great, I've got the title, or Dear Mister, and that's as far as it goes. And then 10 pages later, it's like, thank you for your time and consideration. It's like, that's not all attorney-client privilege. No way. There's got to be something that's not. And so, really getting the agency out of that funk, or, quite frankly, it's destruction of my rights and violation of my rights. And so getting the agency into more transparency. And I understand that I'm going to get a lot of pushback for that, especially when, client agencies or client legislators see what I'm doing of sharing their requests and their information. And then the third thing is making sure that folks know that the AG has an opportunity to do what's called Attorney General's opinions. So an elected official has a request, and it's got to be an elected official, and it's got to be certain ones. I think it's like county commissioners, I believe, is the lowest level. They can send a request for an interpretation of a bill, whether it's proposed or on the books, and how they should proceed. And I think the Attorney General, that's a great tool. Online, they go back as far as like the 70s or 60s, I want to say, and obviously in paper, it's even older than that. I think there's an opportunity to really catalog those and share them publicly. I would love to see the attorney, because they are public records. They are open public. They're not redacted. I mean, if you or I were to ask for one, if we were the appropriate people and they responded, they go right on the website. Well, why not have like a press release about that? And obviously there's going to be some weird nuanced ones about traffic or something like that really doesn't have a statewide impact. But let's say someone asks about childhood endangerment and fentanyl. Let's put that on a website. Let's have a press conference with that individual requesting it and talk about how it'll impact their community and the state as a whole. So I've got a lot of great ideas of how we're going to approach this to give more information to the people and protect the people simultaneously. Biggest thing is just, voting and electing me come November 5th.
Yeah. What I really like about what you're saying is it sounds like you're going to be beholden to the citizens of the state that elect you versus maybe other special interest groups. And that was actually going to be one of my questions. How do you intend to fulfill that obligation? And I think you've touched on it with your priorities, but expand more on that.
Yeah, so we'll start with the priorities and then kind of to come full circles. I don't have special interests that have bought me off. I'm running a very shoestring campaign. It's cost me and my family quite a bit. I mean, we haven't put a ton in financially, but I mean, I got home yesterday, was home for like 5 or 6 hours, got to, I want to say my daughter's second softball game of the season, went with my son on a field trip for half the day, and I'm here in Spokane. I'll be home for most of tomorrow. I promised my wife the first date in several months.
Good for
yeah,
you.
yeah. And then I'm back on the road Saturday. I'll be
Yeah.
back Sunday. And then Monday I've got city council. And then I think Tuesday or Wednesday we're on the road for the rest of the week. Same thing, rinse and repeat. Come back Sunday, Monday, so I can be back for church and city council. And then probably Tuesday back on the road. And that's kind of what it's been for the past several weeks. And obviously it's built up to that. And that's what it's going to be till we get out the vote. Yeah, I mean, look, I wouldn't do this if I didn't think I could make a difference, and I'm not doing this for the money because the money's not that great, quite frankly. I mean, I know people say I think the current rate of the AG's office is like $195,000 or $200,000, which is a great living wage. But what I could make in private practice or elsewhere, it's certainly not for the money. For me, we have an opportunity in 2024 to right the ship.
Yeah.
Or quite frankly, I don't believe the ship ever gets righted. And that's a terrifying thought. If we can't fix it now, I think we get into such a tornado or, a tailspin that I really don't know that we can shovel out of it in 4 more years.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what kind of money I make or gets thrown at me. If I can't fix these problems or at least be an impediment to some of the problems, right? I mean, I might not be able to fix it all, but I can at least stand out, be that voice of the public, and just stand in opposition to the legislature. They're going to pass what they pass, right? I don't have control over them. And so if I can at least do something, my part to make it better here in Washington, I mean, we have so many resources. There's a real opportunity to make this state amazing again.
Yes.
And to me, this really is one of the last frontiers and last opportunities. I'm very concerned about what the future would look like if we're not able to at least stop the bleeding now.
Yeah.
And so that to me is, I have no interest in engaging. I mean, I'm going to engage with everyone, even those interests. And part of it will be in a very aggressive and confrontational manner. I've got my plans of particular organizations or industries that I want to go after. I'm keeping those ones close to the vest just because I think it'll be fun to give people like Christmas morning surprises in January. And we'll
I'm
go
liking
from
the
there.
sound of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, stay tuned. Let's get elected
Yes.
and do the work. And there are some folks, I mean, and then I know we wanted to keep this short.
It's all right.
But,
we're fine.
But,
Yeah.
Yesterday I was at a organized retail crime event up in Seattle. And, they were talking about King County, I believe. It's a $2 billion industry. That's billion with a B.
The retail theft.
Retail theft. Yeah.
Not just retail.
Yeah. And that may have been statewide. I thought it was King County, but it may have been. Regardless, that's $2 billion of goods that gets ripped off of the shelves,
Yep.
not sold, at least not in the clear market where you're going to make tax revenue, and then it gets sold on the black market at pennies on the dollar. I will give Ferguson's office credit. They have a 10-person organized retail crime team, including investigators and attorneys. I met the woman who heads it up. We had a really cordial conversation, and I just looked at her and I said, listen, when I'm your boss in January or when I'm your boss-elect in November, here's my phone number. It's not changing. Call me.
Nice.
I want to have the conversations. I want to make sure you realize that you're a really important piece of what Pete Serrano wants to achieve. And if that means you're 10 people, it needs to be 12, 20. I mean, obviously, we can't just expand it to hundreds of people immediately, but let's go after those. And back to the point of, if Ferguson's taking money from his large lawsuits, why shouldn't I take recovery money and put those assets back in? Yeah. They were talking about a lady that ripped off at least on a conservative estimate, $500,000 of Lululemon, I guess, pants and bras. I don't wear them.
I don't know.
But, it's clothing,
I believe
right?
you.
And so it's just crazy. Like, if you're recovering those types of dollars, and maybe they're not
Yeah.
recovering that in dollars, but if they are, put it back into that organization. And,
Yeah.
I trust that, it was a very good conversation. I think we're starting off on the right foot.
That's awesome. One of the things I am so impressed with you, Pete, is you've been walking the walk, and getting out there in the community. And I just want you to share about what you've seen. I know you've been, downtown Spokane
Yeah.
in the middle of the night, I think.
Yeah.
Or in King County,
Yeah.
downtown Seattle. I don't see your opponent doing that. I want you to share about what you've seen and what you've heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's eye-opening because obviously fentanyl's eating our communities, like literally eating them alive. One of the gentlemen I spoke to here in Spokane, so it was like a Friday night after a dinner, so it would have been no earlier than 9 or 10 o'clock.
Yep. I think we were both at that dinner. Yes.
Yeah. And so went down and, I think his name was Mike or Mark. I forget now, and I shouldn't. But he was walking around in a boot, like a walking boot with his foot all, not gauzed up, but whatever, like ace bandaged up. It's like, dude, what happened to your foot? He said, I had a toe removed. So the one next to the big toe, so right, whatever you call that one on the toe, which would otherwise be your pointer finger. And I said, well, when did you have it removed? He said, about 2 days ago. I said, so you're out here on the streets and like your bandage is clearly going to get dirty and you're risking infection and he's like, well, they released me. Like I had no purpose of being in the hospital anymore and I don't have insurance and had my toe removed and here I am. And then he goes and proceeds to roll up his pant leg and he had what they called alligator skin. It looked like boils and dying skin. And the craziest thing, MJ, was like he was cognizant. He says this to me. Said, if that's what it's doing to the outside of my body, can you imagine what it's doing to the inside? And I'm like, but you're the guy on drugs. Like, I don't know what to tell you, man. And it was like this half admission, half cry for help. And I'm like, what can we do for you? He's like, I'm just going to be out here. I think he said he was 42, so he's 2 years younger than me. I mean, and look where my life is headed. And that's not like highlight me, but like this guy had the same potential I had when we were kids.
Right.
Somewhere something went wrong, and this I'll dovetail in, and I'm only going to focus on the Spokane stories because there are plenty more in King County. Another gentleman that I talked to, younger than I am, he had to be in his 30s, came out here to Spokane to be a plumber apprentice, was doing well. He had been on drugs, basically, he said, as long as he can remember. I don't know if that means, single digits or early teens. And he was on Suboxone, which is, get off drug. And he got to the point where it was the lowest dosage. And when he'd stopped taking it to go cold turkey, it literally caused his body too much pain. And so he said one day he just decided to get high. And he's been out here for a couple months since. And we've talked for about 10 or 15 minutes. And it's interesting because his posture was extremely aggressive when we approached kind of a camp. And then after he started talking to us, then he like pulled me aside to do a one-on-one. And as he's walking across the street, we'd gone up, I think we were on State. So as he's crossing State Street to that 7-Eleven, he turns around and comes back and he said, I just want you to know there's a lot of pain here. We're all hurting and it's all from different sources, but we're just hurting. And it's like, okay, I'm the guy that's like, throw the book at him, Dano, criminalize everything. But I also realized with these experiences, there's a human element that we have to address. And so when it comes to fentanyl, yes, absolutely. Will I be a bulldog about making it a higher priority crime, a felony, so that we can use it as a tool to get people into treatment?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely I will. But does that mean that I'm not someone who has feelings for my fellow humans? Not at all. And that really that shined the light to me of really how there are so many different root causes. And it may be sexual abuse, it may be that someone was trafficked, it may be that someone's dad ignored them. I don't know what your problem is, but it's all resulting and manifesting in the same type of self-treatment, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Those are amazing stories. Final comments to our voters. What do you want them to know?
Yeah, I mean, here's the reality, and I'll talk to you, the voter. Everything I've told you is real. It's an experience for my life. And what I bring to the table is that same level of commitment to fighting for your rights that I do with Silent Majority Foundation day in, day out. I bring the experience of having advised the government, and I've worked on issues that I really do foresee, especially energy and environmental work, that's going to be critical to our future of the state. We could really screw it up if we stay in the way we're going, or we could really fix it by about facing. In addition to that, there's no question that we have a public safety crisis. You cannot trust someone that's had the opportunity to fix it and has done nothing, and that's what my opponent's done. I've been actively working and engaging with the city of Pasco as a council member and now its mayor to make it safer, make it better. We fund our police. We've been working to get funding for a treatment center. We're doing what we can to get people the help they need, but also to get them off the street so that people are invited to downtown Pasco. And I think we've had at least some measure of success. Judge me on my track record, not on what I say. And I assure you this, that same track record will just be an extension on a much larger platform as your Attorney General.
Yeah, and this is the real guy. He's a real deal. And I really appreciate you running, Pete, because it to me, it's a public servant's heart is what you have and what you display. So finally, where can people go to engage with you and your campaign and donate to your campaign? Because I'm sure that would be okay.
That would be all right. We'll take the money. It'd be helpful, except for from the interest.
That's right.
www.serrano4ag, that's SERRANOFORAG.com. And then if you follow on socials, probably our most active one is X, formerly known as Twitter. Facebook has some it's all the same stuff, but the interaction really occurs on X. That's the platform where I think people more freely engage. There's less, shadow banning, censorship, whatever you want to call it. And Instagram's fun, but it doesn't really shine the same light. So X is where we've got the strongest presence, and there's been some pretty active engagement from both sides. And I'll tell you this, hammer me, but if, even if you're calling me a name, that's fine. I'm not going to censor it. I've had my team, they're like, we need to pull this. Like, no. People have the right to speak their mind. It may cast me in a negative light. Then let's let the people research.
Yep.
So.
Walking the talk right here. Pete Serrano, thank you so
you.
much for being here. Go get out and vote for Pete. Ballots drop this week, at the week of the 10th. And so it's so important for everyone to vote. I think that's our biggest challenge as conservative voters is that we've got to get in our vote. So call 10 friends, make sure they vote early, get your ballots in, and make sure you're voting for Pete for the next Attorney General in Washington. Thank you.